بینەرانی بەڕێز جارێکی تریش سڵاوتان لێبێ لە دووهۆکی ڕەنگینەوە لە دیداری ئاشتی و سەقامگیری لە ڕۆژهەڵاتی ناوەڕاست لەگەڵتانین. دیداری ئەمجارەمان لەگەڵ زۆر بەڕێز جۆن جنکینز باڵێزی پێشووتری بریتانیا لە عێراق. بەڕێز Ambassador, thank you very much for this interview with Kurdistan 24. Let me ask you a general question. When we have this forum about peace and security in the Middle East, as you know, the whole Middle East, including Iraq, being created by Great Britain after the First World War. But the problem why you don't see peace, security and stability, especially in Iraq, what's the reason behind that?
First of all, thank you for inviting me to do this interview. The Middle East, the modern Middle East was created in the 1920s. Yes. It was created actually by a mixture of powers. We were one, the French were another.
Yes.
The Turks were another, the Ottoman Turks, or what became the Republic of Turkey in 1925 was another. And many states had agency. The Saudi state under Abdulaziz, who had taken over in 1902 and so forth, had agency as well. So if you look at how the borders were created, the borders between Saudi Arabia and Iraq were created by a mixture of mediation from Britain, but also the actions of King Faisal I and the Emir Abdulaziz of Najd. This was, and they came to an agreement. The same with Jordan. I mean, people talk about the borders as a major issue in the Middle East. I mean, borders are an issue everywhere. For me, the fundamental challenge in the modern Middle East has been the question of governance. And if you look at Iraq, for example, in the 1920s, 1930s, so through the reign of King Faisal al-Awwal, up to the outbreak of the First World War, there were actually great achievements in education, in health, in services, in water, and so forth. What happened after the war, not just in Iraq, but in Egypt and elsewhere, I think was very damaging in terms of the revolutions that happened. The revolutions that happened first in Syria in 1949, Husni Zaim, and then Egypt, 52, and then, of course, the 1958 revolution here in Iraq. And it's a huge question why there has not been a more effective central government. I mean, in many countries, and a government.
Sorry, Mr. Ambassador, is it because of the ruling mentality that we don't see the stability?
So when I was at Yale, I taught at Yale for a year, University of Yale in the United States, and I said to people, we were talking about Middle East politics, and I said, read Ibn Khaldun, read Al-Muqaddimah, and read the third chapter, because the third chapter talks about how states arise, where you get a group coming in, taking the state over, you have the rise of this group, you have Asabiyya, and you have 3 generations, and then it collapses. Because you have this elite at the top of a state, which governs not in the interests of the people, but in the interests of the small elite at the top of the state. And I think you can see that in many countries in the modern Middle East. It's very interesting if you look at the Gulf, if you look at Saudi Arabia, what the Saudis want to do with the economy, with their society, and so they recognize that you need to have reform, particularly because if you look at all polling across the region in the last 10, 15 years, what people seem to want is jobs, services, education, health, and economic freedoms, economic and social freedoms, to start with. I think if you get economic and social freedoms, you will want political freedoms as well at some point. That's a transition. Okay. And that's going to be a challenge. Iraq in particular, the historical experience of Iraq certainly since 1958, probably since 1945, has not been a particularly happy one. Iraq had the best education system in the Middle East. It had the best artistic scene in the Middle East. It had the best literary scene. It had the best health systems. It was an extraordinary place. Okay. And I think the experience of the 1960s, with the turmoil of the 1960s and the emergence of the Ba'ath Party and Saddam Hussein and the way the Saddam government, and then of course the experience of 2003. Right. I mean, this has been not a great platform.
Mr. Ambassador, if we leave the Palestinian and Israeli case or conflict, let us talk about the Kurdish case. In your opinion, what's the best solution for the Kurdish problem
To the
in
Kurdish
the Middle
problem?
East? Yes, in general.
So as somebody said when
Yes.
I was speaking on the panel this morning, I mean, there are
Yes.
40 million Kurds scattered around in Iran, in Iraq,
Turkey,
in Turkey,
Syria, yes.
actually all around the world.
Yes.
40 million. Which is probably, if you look at the global population of Palestinians, about the same number of Palestinians. Within the West Bank and Gaza,
Yes.
there's 9 million, but outside there's a lot more. I think one of the problems Kurds have always faced has been that they are landlocked. The Kurds inhabit an area which is between other major powers. So it's between Iran, Iraq, Syria and Turkey. This is like Matraka or Sindain. And what happens when you get a Matraka or Sindain, you get this. I think of the fate of the Mahabad Republic here in
Yes.
45, 46. This lasts, so the Russians encouraged the Kurds to set up their own state. It's established in Mahabad. The Russians then abandon them, and the Iranians, the Shah comes back. The Iranians then squash it and execute the leaders in the main square
Yes.
of Mahabad. For Kurdish self-determination to work, first of all, it depends whether you want Kurdish self-determination within Iraq, or more broadly, a Kurdish state which also incorporates parts of Iran, Turkey, and Syria, which, if you were looking at the population, the demographics,
Yes.
would be the case. I think these states would resist. The experience of the Kurds since I was going to say since 91, but actually really since 2003 in Iraq. I was listening to the discussion earlier about the relationship between Kurdistan, the KRG, and the central government. These issues of budgetary control, financial transfers, control over oil extraction, of the hydrocarbon resources inside Kurdistan, the issue of the Peshmerga and the military, the relationship between the political relationship between Erbil, Suleimania, and Baghdad. These are issues that have been around since 2003. It's the same issue.
It hasn't been solved until now.
They have not been solved. I mean, Kobad was talking about this as a mindset. I think in Baghdad there is a sense, as in most Arab capitals, that you have to have a centralized authority, a strong centralized authority. And if you let things go, the country will fragment more generally. And Ali al-Wardi, the great anthropologist, he talks about this ازدواجية الشخصية العراقية. Actually, it's more than ازدواجية. It's تعددية الشخصية العراقية. It's not just Shia, Sunni, Yazidi, Christian, Kurd. It's everything. And this is شخصية متشاذمة, متشككة, متفككة. This is one of the problems actually with this. You have to have a politics that works and a sense of national identity within which other communities can flourish.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much
welcome.
This interview
You're
with
very
Kurdistan 24. Thank you. We appreciate that.
welcome.
Binanani Barres am Didarashman legal zor Barres John Jenkins بالوزي بيشوتري بريطانيا العراق ذردا كوتايديت تا ديدار شتر شادو بختوربن خواتان لقال